Slide 184, Lesson 8, Strong Verbs, Definition. So why do we need to know about strong and weak verbs? Well, they determine how the vowels appear on the various verb stems. And they also affect the various letters added to conjugate the stem. Now the word conjugate simply refers to whether they are a perfect or imperfect, imperative, participle, jussive, and so on and so forth. So let's see some more definitions. Hebrew verbs, as stated, are either strong or weak. We have looked at strong verbs so far in our Kal perfect and imperfect verb tables in lessons 6 and 7. The Kal perfect third person masculine singular is the simplest form of the Hebrew verb. Kal means light from the word kalal, and it just means simple or light. It designates the simple active stem of the verb. We've seen also that there are 6 derived stems from Kal. We saw that in part 1 of lesson 8. That is Nafal, Pile, Puel, Hiffel, Hoffel, Hitpal, and so forth. Now, not all verbs and their stems are strong verbs. For example, some verbs have 2 consonants, and they're called hollow verbs. And these hollow verbs are weak verbs. A strong verb must have 3 consonants in its Kal perfect third masculine singular form. And there are a number of other constraints that determine whether the verb is a strong verb or a weak verb. So let's look at some more definitions of the strong verb. Slide 185. Lesson 8, Strong Verbs, Definition. So let's continue with our definitions. We've already seen that a strong verb must have 3 consonants in its Kal perfect third masculine singular form, or 3ms. We saw that in the previous slide. But what sort of consonants make a strong verb? A strong verb cannot have any of the following: a middle vowel with a yod or a vav, in which case it's called a hollow verb, because it is really just 2 consonants with a yod or vav in the middle, which becomes a vowel. That is, it's hollow. So a strong verb cannot have a yod or a vav in the middle of it. And a strong verb cannot have a guttural letter, and that's an aleph or a hay or a chet or an ayin, and sometimes a resh. So it can't have any of these, and sometimes this. And a strong verb cannot begin with a yod or a vav or a nun. So if it has a yod, a vav, or a nun in the at the beginning of the verb, then it's not a strong verb. If its second and third consonants are identical, so if the last 2 consonants are the same, then it's not a strong verb. So all these exceptions here for what a strong verb can't be are called weak verbs. So anything with any of these characteristics here is a weak verb, and anything that doesn't have these characteristics is by default a strong verb. Slide 186. Lesson 8, Strong Verbs, Examples. So let's have a look at some examples of the strong verb, remembering that they cannot have any of the following weak letter characteristics. They can't have a middle vowel with a yod or a vav. They can't have a guttural letter. They can have a resh in most cases, but sometimes they can't. That's just an exception, just once in a while. They can't begin with a yod or vav or a nun, and they can't have the second and third consonants identical. So let's have a look at some strong verb examples. Karat. It does have the resh, and the resh is usually part of if the verb contains a resh, in most cases it's a strong verb, but there is just a couple of exceptions when it isn't. So karat, he cut. Kashal, he stumbled. Katav, he wrote. Mashal, he ruled. Notice they're kind of strong words. When you have these letters in here, it tends to be a weaker sound. Pakad, he visited. Katal, he killed. Shakav or Shachav, he lay down. Shamar, he kept. So these are all strong verbs, and they don't have any of these characteristics here. Slide 187, Lesson 8, Weak Verbs, Examples. So we've already had a look at some strong verbs. Let's have a look in contrast to weak verbs. So, a verb is weak if its middle vowel has a yod or a vav, in which case it's called a hollow verb, because it is really just two consonants with a yod or a vav in the middle, which becomes a vowel. So effectively it's hollow. It's got nothing in the middle. So these are hollow verbs, or which are weak verbs. Bo, to go. Mut, to die. Kum, to arise. Rum, to be high or exalted. Seem, to put or place. Shuv, to return or turn. So they all have a yod or a vav in the middle of them, acting as a vowel. Here it's a herek yod, giving it an E sound, and here it's a shurek, a vav with a dot in it, giving it an U sound. So effectively it doesn't really have a middle consonant, it's more of a vowel, hence it's hollow. Alright, another type of weak verb. It is a weak verb if there is a guttural letter, an aleph, a hey, a chet, an ayin, and very rarely sometimes a resh also. So let's have a look at some weak verbs according to this definition. Here we have the word for he heard, shamar, and it has an ayin. That's a guttural letter. So this is a weak verb. Matzah, he found. Matzah has an aleph, which again is a guttural letter. So it's a weak verb. Matzah, he found. Allah, well this has got two guttural letters, one at the beginning and one at the end, an ayin and a hey. Allah, he ascended. Pachad, he trembled or feared. Pachad, he trembled or feared. Ratzah, he pierced. Ratzah, he pierced. It's got an ayin. By the way, pachad has a chet just there. Ratzach, he murdered. Ratzach. Shabach. Shabach, again it has a chet. He extolled or calmed. Achal has an aleph here. And zachak, it has a chet. He laughed. Slide 188, Lesson 8, Weak Verbs Examples, continued. So let's have a look at some more examples. It is a weak verb if it begins with a yod, a vav, or a nun. So here's some examples. The first three begin with a yod. Yitzak, to pour. Yitzar, to form. Yasad, to establish. And the last three begin with a nun. Nafal, to fall. Nagash, to come near. Natan, to give. And we have the word vav, and it begins, of course, with a vav, and vav means to attach, and it's the word used to mean clip, the little clasps that attached the curtains were called vavs, and the letter vav is used to attach two different parts of a sentence together. You put a vav between the words at the front of a word, and it means and the word and attaches two different things. In any case, the verb or vav, to attach, is a weak verb. Okay, some more examples. It is a weak verb if its second and third consonants are identical. For example, chakak, to cut or engrave, has two kufs at the end. Tamam, to be completed, has two mems at the end. Shadad, to destroy, has two dalats at the end. Shavav, to return, has two bets at the end. Katzatz, to cut off, has two tzadis at the end, a tzadi and a final tzadi. Salal, to heap up, has two lameds. So all of these are weak verbs too, because their second and third consonants are identical. So this wraps it up for the examples of weak verbs.